Captain Ryan Carter stood on the bridge of the SS Vanguard, staring out at the stars through the wide viewport. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, and his jaw was clenched. He wasn't happy about this assignment, not one bit. The ship in front of him was supposed to represent humanity's greatest hope against the Krylos, an alien race that had been attacking Earth's colonies for years. But instead of a sleek, powerful warship, what he saw looked more like someone's bad idea of a joke. The Vanguard was, well, ugly. Its design seemed to have been thrown together without much thought. Parts of the hull were mismatched, with different shades of gray metal patched together haphazardly. One of the turrets looked slightly crooked, as if it hadn't been bolted on properly. Even the nameplate above the main entrance was peeling at the edges. It was hard to believe this was the same fleet that had once built some of the most advanced ships in human history. Ryan sighed deeply and turned to face Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hart, who had been assigned as his second-in-command. She was already flipping through data pads, trying to familiarize herself with the ship's systems. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly, but her expression mirrored Ryan's frustration. "Do you think they gave us this thing because they don't expect us to come back?" Ryan asked dryly. Lisa glanced up from her work, raising an eyebrow. "Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. This ship looks like it belongs in a museum or a junkyard." Ryan couldn't argue with that. He'd heard rumors during training about how the United Earth Fleet had been stretched thin after years of fighting the Krylos. Resources were scarce, and newer, better ships were being reserved for higher-profile missions. That left crews like his stuck with whatever scraps remained. Still, there was something almost insulting about the Vanguard. It didn't just look bad. It felt wrong. Like it wasn't meant to inspire confidence but pity. As Ryan walked down the narrow corridors of the ship, he couldn't help but notice the constant hum of poorly maintained machinery. Lights flickered occasionally, and the air smelled faintly of burnt wiring. When he reached the engine room, he found Lieutenant Samantha Brooks, or Sam, as she preferred to be called, lying underneath a panel with tools scattered around her. Her dark hair was tied back messily, and grease stains covered her uniform. "How's it going, Lieutenant?" Ryan asked, leaning against the doorway. Sam slid out from under the panel and wiped her hands on a rag before standing up. "Well, sir, let's just say this ship has personality. Lots of it." She grinned despite the chaos around her. "But don't worry. I'll keep her running. Somehow." Ryan appreciated her optimism, even if it felt misplaced. If anyone could wrangle this disaster of a ship into working order, it was Sam. She had a reputation for fixing things no one else could, though usually those things weren't quite this broken. Later that evening, Ryan sat alone in his quarters, staring at a holographic map of their upcoming mission. They were tasked with patrolling a sector near the edge of Krylos-controlled space, a dangerous area where skirmishes were common. Normally, such missions required top-of-the-line ships with experienced crews. Instead, they were sending the Vanguard. Ryan leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He wanted to believe in his crew, in himself, and maybe even in this ridiculous ship. But doubt gnawed at him. What if they failed? What if the Vanguard fell apart mid-battle, leaving them stranded or worse? Still, Ryan knew one thing for certain. Whether the ship was stupid or not, it was all they had. And if humanity was going to survive this war, they'd need to make it work, no matter how unlikely it seemed. The next morning, Captain Ryan Carter gathered his crew in the briefing room. It was a small space, cramped and dimly lit, much like the rest of the SS Vanguard. The mismatched chairs squeaked as people shifted uncomfortably, and the air smelled faintly of recycled oxygen. Ryan stood at the front, leaning against the edge of the table, watching his team with a mix of curiosity and concern. "This is it," he began, glancing around the room. "We're all that stands between the Krylos and Earth's colonies in this sector. Let's get to know each other." Lieutenant Samantha Brooks raised her hand slightly, though she didn't wait to be called on. "Sir, I'm Sam," she said with a grin, pointing to herself. "I'll be keeping the ship from falling apart. Hopefully." Her tone was light, but there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. Next to her sat Corporal Ethan Cole, the ship's pilot. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking more bored than nervous. When Ryan nodded in his direction, Ethan gave a lazy wave. "Ethan," he said simply, "I fly stuff. You probably already guessed that. Just don't ask me to do anything fancy. This bucket of bolts might not survive it." Ryan chuckled despite himself. At least Ethan was honest. Dr. Laura Bennett, the ship's scientist, cleared her throat softly before introducing herself. She adjusted her glasses and spoke in a quiet, measured voice. "I'm Laura. My job is to analyze data and help us understand the Krylos better. I'll also assist with, well, anything technical." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "And yes, I know the ship isn't ideal, but I believe we can make it work." Ryan appreciated her optimism. Laura seemed shy, maybe even a little awkward, but her intelligence was clear. He made a mental note to rely on her when things got complicated. Finally, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hart stood up briefly. "You already know me, Captain," she said with a confident smile. "But I'll handle communications, strategy, and making sure everyone stays alive, including you." The crew laughed lightly, breaking some of the tension in the room. Ryan felt a small spark of hope. These people were far from perfect, but they had heart, and that might just be enough. Over the next few days, the crew settled into their roles, or at least tried to. Sam spent most of her time in the engine room, muttering to herself as she patched up one problem after another. Ethan practiced flying maneuvers in the simulator, cursing every time the controls lagged or the ship's systems glitched. Laura buried herself in research, poring over files about the Krylos while occasionally offering suggestions to improve the ship's sensors. And Lisa worked tirelessly to coordinate everything, ensuring the crew functioned as a team. Despite their efforts, the Vanguard continued to test their patience. During one practice drill, the main cannon fired prematurely, nearly taking out a nearby satellite. Another time, the artificial gravity fluctuated so wildly that half the crew ended up floating near the ceiling. Each incident left them shaking their heads, wondering how they'd ever survive real combat. One evening, after yet another frustrating day, Ethan joined Ryan in the mess hall. The two men sat across from each other, picking at trays of bland food. The silence stretched until Ethan finally broke it. "You know," he said, poking at his mashed potatoes with a fork, "if I didn't know any better, I'd say this ship was designed by someone who hated us." Ryan smirked. "Maybe it was. Or maybe it's just humanity's way of saying we need to earn our victories." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Earn them?" "Sir, we're flying a tin can held together by duct tape and prayers. There's no earning here, just surviving." Ryan nodded slowly. He couldn't argue with that. But deep down, he believed there was something special about this crew. They were underdogs, sure, but sometimes underdogs found ways to win. Maybe the Vanguard wasn't perfect, but neither were they. Together, they might just stand a chance. As the days passed, the crew grew closer, bonding over shared struggles and small victories. They joked about naming the ship the Tin Can and started referring to its quirks as personality traits rather than flaws. Slowly but surely, they began to see the Vanguard not as a liability, but as part of their team. And though none of them would admit it out loud, they started to feel a strange sense of pride in their ridiculous little ship. The SS Vanguard was 3 days into its patrol mission when the first real test came. The crew had just finished breakfast, mostly rehydrated meals and weak coffee, when alarms blared through the ship. Red warning lights flashed on the bridge, and Lieutenant Commander Lisa Hart's voice crackled over the intercom. "Captain, we've got company," she said sharply. 3 Krylos scout ships, closing fast. Ryan Carter rushed to the bridge, his heart pounding. This wasn't a drill anymore. For weeks, they'd joked about how useless their ship was, but now they were face to face with the enemy. He slid into the command chair, gripping the armrests tightly as he studied the holographic display in front of him. The Krylos ships were sleek and menacing, their sharp designs a stark contrast to the clunky Vanguard. "Ethan, get us out of here," Ryan barked. Corporal Ethan Cole was already at the controls, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced by intense focus. "Doing my best, sir," he muttered, his fingers flying over the console. But the Vanguard wasn't built for speed. Its engines groaned in protest as Ethan tried to maneuver the ship away from the approaching scouts. "They're firing," Lisa shouted, her voice tense. A bright streak of energy shot past the Vanguard, narrowly missing its hull. Sam Brooks, who had been monitoring the ship's systems from the engine room, called in over the comms. "Sir, one of the turrets is overheating. I can't shut it down." "Just don't let it explode," Ryan snapped, though he knew Sam was doing everything she could. Then something strange happened. The overheating turret, instead of exploding, fired wildly in all directions. One of the blasts hit an asteroid floating nearby, sending chunks of rock spiraling toward the Krylos ships. The alien vessels immediately broke formation, trying to avoid the debris. Their once coordinated attack turned chaotic. "What just happened?" Ethan asked, glancing back at Ryan with wide eyes. "I don't know," Ryan admitted, watching the scene unfold on the display. But it worked. The Krylos scouts seemed confused, their movements hesitant as they tried to regroup. Meanwhile, the Vanguard continued to act unpredictably. Another system malfunction caused the ship to veer sharply to the left, making it look like a deliberate evasive maneuver. Ethan seized the opportunity, guiding the ship through a narrow gap between two larger asteroids. "Laura, can you jam their sensors?" Ryan asked, turning to Dr. Laura Bennett, who was stationed at the science console. "I'll try," she replied, her hands moving quickly over the controls. A moment later, static filled the Krylos communication channels, disrupting their coordination further. With the enemy distracted, Ethan pushed the engines to their limit, weaving the Vanguard through the asteroid field. The ship groaned and shuddered, but somehow it held together. Finally, after what felt like hours, the Krylos gave up the chase, disappearing into the void. As the danger passed, the bridge fell silent. Everyone stared at each other, stunned by what had just happened. They hadn't won because of skill or superior technology. They'd survived because of sheer luck and the Vanguard's bizarre behavior. "Well," Ethan said eventually, breaking the silence with a smirk, "I guess this stupid ship isn't completely useless." Ryan let out a long breath, shaking his head. "Don't jinx it, Ethan. But yeah, maybe there's something to this thing after all." Sam chimed in over the comms, her voice tinged with pride. "Told you I could keep her running, sir." Lisa leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "So what does this mean? Are we saying our secret weapon is being unpredictable?" Ryan thought about it for a moment. Maybe. Or maybe it's just proof that even the worst odds can turn in your favor if you don't give up. For the first time since boarding the Vanguard, the crew felt a flicker of hope. Their ship might be flawed, but those flaws had just saved their lives. And as they drifted safely away from the Krylos, they couldn't help but wonder, maybe being unpredictable wasn't such a bad thing after all. After their narrow escape from the Krylos scouts, the crew of the SS Vanguard gathered in the briefing room once again. This time, however, the mood was different. Instead of frustration or despair, there was a cautious optimism in the air. They had survived against all odds, and now they wanted answers. Dr. Laura Bennett stood at the front of the room, holding a datapad. Her usual quiet demeanor was replaced by a sense of purpose as she addressed the group. "I've been analyzing the ship's systems," she began, adjusting her glasses nervously. "And I think I've figured out why the Vanguard behaves the way it does." Ryan Carter leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Go on." Laura hesitated for a moment before continuing. "It wasn't built to be perfect, or even good. It was designed to be unpredictable. Every system on this ship has built-in variations that make its actions random. The turrets fire at odd angles, the engines fluctuate power output, and even the sensors give inconsistent readings. At first, I thought it was sloppy engineering, but now I'm starting to think it was intentional. Ethan Cole raised an eyebrow. You're saying someone actually planned for this thing to be a mess? Exactly, Laura replied. Think about it. The Krylos are highly organized. Their ships move in precise formations, and their strategies rely on predictability. If we can throw them off balance, even just a little, we might stand a chance. Sam Brooks chimed in, her voice filled with awe. So our stupid ship is actually some kind of genius plan. It's possible, Laura admitted. But if that's true, no one told us. This design would only work if the crew knew how to adapt to its quirks. Ryan sat back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He felt a mix of emotions, anger at being kept in the dark, but also relief that their struggles weren't entirely pointless. If this was deliberate, he said slowly, then someone higher up must have known what they were doing. Admiral Hayes, maybe. Lisa Hart frowned. Do you think he trusted us to figure it out on our own? Or was this just another gamble? I don't know, Ryan admitted. But if this ship really is part of some bigger strategy, then we need to embrace it. We can't fight the Krylos the way other ships do. We have to use what makes us different. The crew exchanged glances, each of them processing the revelation. For weeks, they'd cursed the Vanguard for its flaws, but now those same flaws seemed like their greatest strength. Over the next few days, they began experimenting with the ship's systems, learning how to harness its unpredictability. Ethan practiced flying erratic patterns, using the ship's jerky movements to confuse simulated enemies. Sam fine-tuned the turrets, programming them to fire in bursts that mimicked random behavior while still aiming for targets. Laura worked on enhancing the sensor interference capabilities, creating false signals that could mislead the Krylos. Even Lisa found new ways to communicate with Earth Command without revealing too much about their tactics. She crafted vague reports that emphasized their survival rather than their methods, buying them time to refine their approach. Despite the progress, doubts lingered. One evening, Ryan joined Laura in the science lab. She was hunched over her workstation, surrounded by holographic diagrams of the ship's schematics. You okay? He asked softly. Laura looked up, startled. Oh, Captain. Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking. About what? She sighed, leaning back in her chair. This whole thing feels wrong. Like we're pawns in someone else's game. What if this strategy gets us killed? Or worse, what if it's not even real? Ryan nodded. He'd had similar thoughts. I get it. But here's the thing. Whether it's real or not, it's working. And right now, that's all that matters. We'll figure out the rest later. Laura smiled faintly. You're right, sir. Thanks. As Ryan left the lab, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something important. But for now, they had a mission and a newfound understanding of their ship. The Vanguard might not look like much, but it had potential. And with a crew willing to adapt, it might just become humanity's most unlikely weapon. The SS Vanguard received new orders the next morning. Admiral Gregory Hayes contacted Captain Ryan Carter directly, his stern face appearing on the main screen of the bridge. Captain, he began without preamble. We've located a Krylos mining outpost deep in enemy territory. It's supplying their warships with vital resources. Your mission is to infiltrate and gather intelligence. Ryan frowned. Sir, with all due respect, the Vanguard isn't exactly built for stealth missions. Hayes' expression didn't change. That's precisely why you're being sent. The Krylos expect us to send our best ships, fast, sleek, and deadly. They won't see you coming because they'll assume you're insignificant. Use that to your advantage. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Ryan staring at the blank screen. He turned to his crew, who were already assembling on the bridge. Looks like we're going behind enemy lines, he announced. Ethan groaned from the pilot's seat. Great, just what this ship needs. a suicide run. Not if we plan it right, Lisa said firmly. She pulled up a holographic map of the area surrounding the outpost. The outpost is surrounded by dense asteroid fields. Bigger ships can't navigate them easily, but we might be able to slip through. Sam nodded enthusiastically. And if we rig the engines to sputter and die randomly, we can look like a damaged ship drifting toward them. Maybe they'll let us get close enough to scan. Laura chimed in, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. I can create decoy signals to make it seem like there are multiple ships nearby. If the Krylos think we're part of a larger fleet, they might hesitate long enough for us to gather the data. Ryan felt a surge of pride as he looked around at his crew. Each of them had embraced the quirks of the Vanguard, turning its weaknesses into strengths. All right, he said, clapping his hands together. Let's do this. 2 days later, the Vanguard approached the edge of the asteroid field. Ethan guided the ship carefully, dodging jagged rocks while keeping the movements jerky and unpredictable. Sam monitored the engine output, occasionally cutting power to simulate damage. From the outside, the ship looked exactly like what they wanted it to appear, a broken-down wreck limping through space. As they neared the outpost, Laura activated the decoy system. False sensor readings flooded the Krylos network, creating the illusion of several ships lurking just beyond the asteroids. Meanwhile, Lisa intercepted enemy communications, feeding snippets back to Earth Command. They're talking about us, Lisa reported, her eyes scanning the incoming messages. They think we're a scout ship for a bigger attack force. Perfect, Ryan muttered. Keep playing along. When the Vanguard finally drifted within range of the outpost, the Krylos made their move. A small patrol ship detached from the station and moved to investigate. Ryan held his breath as the alien vessel circled them cautiously. For a moment, it seemed like they might open fire, but then the patrol ship hailed them. "This is Outpost Delta 7. A gruff voice crackled over the comms. "Identify yourselves." Lisa responded quickly, disguising her voice with a modulator. "This is Freighter Alpha 9. We took heavy damage crossing the asteroid belt, requesting permission to dock for repairs." There was a long pause before the reply came. "Permission granted." Approached slowly. Ryan exhaled sharply, relief washing over him. "Nice work, Lisa." As the Vanguard edged closer to the outpost, Laura worked furiously at her console, scanning every detail she could. The data poured in, revealing the outpost's layout, resource stockpiles, and defensive capabilities. Within minutes, they had everything they needed. "All right," Ryan said quietly. "Let's get out of here before they realize something's wrong." Ethan grinned, his hands flying over the controls. "Gladly, sir." Just as the Vanguard disengaged from the docking bay, alarms blared across the outpost. Someone must have noticed inconsistencies in their scans. But it was too late. The Vanguard was already weaving through the asteroid field, its erratic movements throwing off pursuit. Back in safer territory, the crew celebrated their success. They had done the impossible, not with brute force or superior technology, but with ingenuity and teamwork. And for the first time, none of them doubted the value of the Vanguard. After their successful mission at the Krylos mining outpost, the crew of the SS Vanguard gathered in the science lab to review the data they had collected. Dr. Laura Bennett sat hunched over her console, her face illuminated by the glow of holographic displays. The rest of the team stood around her, waiting anxiously for her analysis. "This is bad," Laura said finally, her voice low and uneasy. She turned to face them, her glasses slightly askew. The outpost wasn't just a resource hub. It was also a relay station for communications between the Krylos Command and their forces near Earth. Ryan Carter frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means someone on our side has been talking to them," Laura explained. "I found encrypted messages being sent from human outposts, messages containing troop movements and supply routes. Someone's feeding them information." A heavy silence fell over the room. Lisa Hart crossed her arms tightly, her expression darkening. "Are you saying there's a traitor in Earth Command?" I don't know who or how high up it goes, Laura admitted. But these messages aren't accidental. They're deliberate and recent. Sam Brooks let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through her hair. So we're not just fighting aliens anymore. We've got humans stabbing us in the back too. Ethan Cole leaned against the wall, his usual sarcasm replaced by quiet anger. If this gets out, people will panic. Half the fleet might lose faith in Earth Command. Ryan rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. He knew he had to make a decision, and quickly. Exposing the betrayal could destabilize humanity's war effort, but keeping it hidden meant letting the Krylos continue to exploit their advantage. We can't tell anyone yet, Ryan said firmly, looking at each member of his crew. Not until we know more. If word gets out before we have proof, it'll only make things worse. Lisa nodded reluctantly. Agreed. But we need to keep digging. Find out who's behind this. Over the next few days, Ethan took it upon himself to investigate further. Using the Vanguard's outdated but surprisingly effective hacking tools, he tapped into secure channels and intercepted transmissions. At first, he didn't find much, just routine chatter between Earth Command and various outposts. But one message caught his attention. Found something, Ethan announced during a late-night meeting in the briefing room. He projected a transcript onto the screen. This came from an outpost near the front lines. Looks like a request for reinforcements, but buried in the code are coordinates for a human supply convoy. Laura studied the message carefully. Those coordinates matched the route of a convoy that disappeared last week. Everyone thought it was a Krylos ambush, but what if it was planned? Ryan clenched his fists. Someone gave them those coordinates deliberately. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Whoever was responsible for leaking information had blood on their hands, human blood. And now the Vanguard was caught in the middle of it. Determined to uncover the truth, Ethan traced the origin of the message. After hours of work, he narrowed it down to a single source, Admiral Gregory Hayes. Ryan felt his stomach drop when Ethan showed him the evidence. Hayes, the same man who had ordered them to infiltrate the Krylos outpost, was involved in the betrayal. We can't trust anyone, Ryan muttered bitterly. Not even the people giving us orders. Lisa placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we do this ourselves. We expose him, but only after we gathered enough proof to bring him down without causing chaos. The crew agreed. For now, they would act as though nothing had changed, continuing their missions while secretly building a case against Hayes. It was risky, but they had no other choice. As Ryan lay awake that night in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Humanity was already losing the war against the Krylos. Now, it seemed they were losing themselves too. But deep down, Ryan knew one thing for certain. The Vanguard and its mismatched crew were the only ones who could set things right. The SS Vanguard was on its way back to friendly territory when disaster struck. An unexpected Krylos ambush caught them off guard, and the ship's already fragile systems began to fail under the strain of evasive maneuvers. Alarms blared across the bridge as red warning lights flashed ominously. One of the engines is down. Sam shouted from the engine room, her voice tense over the comms. I'm trying to reroute power, but it's not looking good. Ethan gripped the controls tightly, sweat beading on his forehead as he struggled to keep the ship steady. We're drifting too close to that black hole, he yelled. If we don't stabilize soon, we're done for. Ryan stood at the center of the chaos, his mind racing. The crew needed him to stay calm, to think clearly. He turned to Lisa. Can we call for backup? Lisa shook her head grimly. Not in time. We're too deep into enemy space. We're on our own. Laura worked furiously at her console, trying to calculate their odds. Captain, if we can't fix the engine, we'll cross the event horizon in less than 10 minutes. The weight of the situation pressed down on everyone. For all their cleverness and determination, the Vanguard might finally meet its end. Not in a blaze of glory, but swallowed by the void of a black hole. Sam, "How much time do you need?" Ryan asked, his voice firm despite the fear gnawing at him. "I don't know, sir," Sam replied, her frustration evident. "This isn't just a patch job, it's a full repair. And I'm doing it while floating in zero gravity because half the engine room has lost artificial gravity." Ryan clenched his jaw. "Then we buy you more time." He turned to Ethan. "Do whatever it takes to keep us away from that black hole. Use every trick this stupid ship has left." Ethan nodded, his hands flying over the controls. The Vanguard lurched violently as he activated emergency thrusters, pushing the damaged ship into wild spirals. It was a desperate move, but it bought them precious seconds. Meanwhile, Sam fought against impossible odds in the engine room. Tools floated around her as she worked, tethered to the wall by a safety line. Her fingers moved quickly, rewiring circuits and sealing leaks with makeshift patches. Every second felt like an eternity. "We're losing altitude," Ethan called out, his voice strained. "I can't hold this trajectory forever." "Almost there," Sam shouted back, her voice cracking with effort. "Just a little longer." On the bridge, Laura monitored the ship's descent toward the black hole. 3 minutes until critical point," she announced, her tone measured but urgent. Ryan stepped closer to the viewport, staring at the swirling darkness ahead. He thought about everything they had been through. The battles, the betrayals, the moments of hope. If this was how it ended, he wanted to face it head-on. But then, with a sudden jolt, the second engine roared back to life. The ship stabilized just enough for Ethan to regain control. Cheers erupted across the comms as Sam's voice came through, breathless but triumphant. "I did it. The engine's online." Ethan wasted no time, steering the Vanguard away from the black hole's pull. The crew held their breath as the ship slowly escaped its deadly grasp. When they were finally safe, Ryan addressed the team over the intercom. "Listen up," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Today proved something important. This ship may look like junk, and we may feel like underdogs, but none of that matters. What matters is that we didn't give up. Each of you risked your lives, for each other, for humanity. That's why we're still here." His words hung in the air, resonating with everyone aboard. They had faced death and survived, not because of luck, but because of courage and teamwork. Later, as the crew regrouped in the mess hall, Ethan raised a cup of weak coffee and a mock toast. "To the Vanguard," he said with a grin. "The stupidest warship in history, and somehow, the best." They laughed, the tension melting away. For now, they were alive, and as long as they stayed together, they knew they could face whatever came next. The SS Vanguard returned to friendly territory, battered but intact. The crew had barely recovered from their brush with the black hole when new orders arrived, orders that would test them more than ever before. Admiral Hayes contacted Captain Ryan Carter directly, his voice unusually urgent. "Captain," Hayes began, skipping formalities, "intelligence has identified a key Krylos weapon factory near the edge of their territory. It's supplying advanced technology to their fleets. Your mission is to disable it." Ryan frowned. "Sir, with all due respect, the Vanguard isn't built for direct assaults. We're lucky to survive skirmishes, let alone take out a fortified target." Hayes leaned closer to the screen, his expression grim. "I know what you're capable of, Captain. You've proven time and again that unpredictability can win battles. This factory is critical. If we destroy it, we'll cripple their war effort. You're the only ones who can pull this off." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Ryan staring at the blank screen. He turned to his crew, who were already gathering on the bridge. "We've got a problem," he said simply. "They want us to take out a Krylos weapon factory." Ethan groaned, slumping into the pilot's seat. "Great, just what this ship needed. A suicide mission." Sam crossed her arms, determination etched on her face. "It's not impossible. We've used our quirks to confuse them before. Maybe we can do it again." Laura nodded thoughtfully. "If we plan carefully, We might be able to exploit their overconfidence. They won't expect us to attack something so important. Lisa pulled up a holographic map of the area surrounding the factory. The facility is heavily guarded, but there are blind spots in their defenses. If we approach from an unexpected angle, we might slip through. Ryan studied the map, weighing their options. "All right," he said finally. "Here's the plan. Ethan, you'll fly us in using erratic maneuvers to look like a damaged ship. Sam, make sure the engines sputter convincingly. Laura, create decoy signals to draw their attention away from us. Lisa, handle communications and keep an eye on enemy movements." The crew sprang into action, each member focused on their role. As they approached the factory, Ethan guided the Vanguard through narrow asteroid fields, its jerky movements mimicking the ship struggling to stay afloat. Sam monitored the engine output, occasionally cutting power to simulate malfunctions. From the outside, the Vanguard looked exactly like what they wanted it to appear, harmless and broken. When they reached the factory, Laura activated the decoy system. False sensor readings flooded the Krylos network, creating the illusion of multiple ships attacking from different directions. Meanwhile, Lisa intercepted enemy communications, feeding snippets back to Earth Command. "They're scrambling fighters," Lisa reported, her eyes scanning the incoming messages. "They think we're part of a larger fleet." "Perfect," Ryan muttered. "Let's hit them hard while they're distracted." Sam armed the turrets, programming them to fire randomly, but accurately enough to cause real damage. When the first volley struck the factory, alarms blared across the Krylos compound. Chaos erupted as their forces tried to respond to both the decoys and the actual attack. Ethan piloted the Vanguard in tight loops around the facility, dodging enemy fire while delivering precise strikes. "This is insane," he shouted, grinning despite the danger. "But it's working." Finally, after several intense minutes, the factory's main reactor destabilized. A massive explosion lit up the void, sending shockwaves through space. The crew cheered as Ethan guided the Vanguard away from the destruction. Their mission complete. Back in safer territory, the crew celebrated their victory. They had done the impossible, not with brute force or superior technology, but with ingenuity and teamwork. And for the first time, none of them doubted the value of the Vanguard. It wasn't just a ship. It was proof that even the most unlikely heroes could change the course of a war. The SS Vanguard docked at a United Earth Fleet station for repairs and resupply. Captain Ryan Carter knew this was his chance to confront Admiral Hayes about the betrayal they had uncovered. He requested an urgent meeting, his mind racing with questions and doubts. When he stepped into Hayes' office, the Admiral looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Captain Carter," Hayes said, gesturing for him to sit. "What brings you here?" Ryan didn't waste time. "We know about the messages, sir, the ones being sent to the Krylos." Hayes froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then he leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "I see. And how did you find out?" Ryan placed a data pad on the desk, showing the intercepted transmissions and their origins. "This is proof that someone in Earth Command has been leaking information to the enemy. Someone high-ranking." Hayes studied the data silently before nodding slowly. "You're right. I've known about it for some time now." Ryan felt anger rising in his chest. "You knew, and you didn't stop it." "It's more complicated than that," Hayes replied, his voice heavy. "These negotiations were necessary. We needed to buy time. Humanity isn't ready for a full-scale war against the Krylos yet. By feeding them just enough information, we hoped to delay their attacks while we prepared." Ryan stood up, his fists clenched. "So you sacrificed lives, human lives, to play politics? Do you have any idea what it's like out there? My crew risks everything every day. And meanwhile, you're cutting deals behind our backs." Hayes met his gaze steadily. "I won't defend my methods, Captain, but I will remind you of the stakes. If we lose this war, billions will die. Sometimes hard choices must be made to ensure survival." Ryan shook his head, disgusted but unwilling to let his emotions cloud his judgment. If you think I'm going to keep quiet about this, you're wrong. This goes beyond strategy. It's treason. Hayes sighed, rubbing his temples. If word gets out, it could destroy morale. The fleet would fracture. Is that what you want? No, Ryan admitted, lowering his voice. But neither do I want us fighting blindly while traitors undermine us. Here's the deal. I won't expose this, for now, but you'll give us your full support moving forward. No more holding back resources or sending us on missions without proper intel. The Vanguard stays operational, and my crew gets whatever we need. Hayes hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Agreed. You have my word. As Ryan left the office, he felt conflicted. Hayes' explanation made sense in a cold, calculated way, but it didn't excuse the betrayal. Still, exposing the truth now would only weaken humanity's position. For now, keeping the secret was the lesser evil. Back aboard the Vanguard, Ryan gathered his crew in the briefing room. He didn't tell them everything. Not yet, but he shared enough to reassure them. Earth Command knows about the leaks, he said. They're working to address it. In the meantime, we continue doing what we do best, staying unpredictable. The crew exchanged glances, sensing there was more to the story, but they trusted Ryan. Lisa spoke up first. Whatever happens next, we stick together. That's how we've survived this long. Ethan smirked. Yeah, and if anyone tries to sell us out again, we'll just blow 'em up. Right, Captain? Ryan managed a small smile. Something like that. Later, as Ryan sat alone in his quarters, he stared at the stars through the viewport. The weight of leadership pressed down on him. He had made a deal with a man he didn't fully trust, all to protect his crew and humanity. It wasn't the kind of decision heroes made in stories, but it was real. For now, the Vanguard and its mismatched crew were still in the fight, and as long as they stayed true to each other, Ryan believed they could overcome anything, even the worst odds. The SS Vanguard led a small coalition of ships toward the Krylos flagship, a massive vessel that loomed like a shadow over the battlefield. This was humanity's last stand against the alien threat, and every surviving ship had been called upon for the mission. The crew of the Vanguard knew their role, to draw the enemy's attention while the larger ships prepared for the final assault. Captain Ryan Carter stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the approaching flagship. "All right, team," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "This is it. Let's show them what this stupid ship can do." Ethan grinned as he took his seat at the controls. "Time to dance, Captain." Sam monitored the engine systems from below, ensuring they were ready for the unpredictable maneuvers ahead. Laura worked furiously at her console, creating decoy signals to confuse the enemy fleet. Lissa coordinated communications between the Vanguard and the other ships, keeping everyone aligned. As they entered the fray, Ethan guided the Vanguard into wild spirals and sharp turns, making it nearly impossible for the Krylos to lock onto them. The ship's erratic behavior confused the enemy forces, who focused their fire on the smaller vessel instead of the larger ships preparing to strike. "They're targeting us," Lisa shouted, watching the barrage of energy blasts streak past the viewport. "Good," Ryan replied grimly. "Keep them distracted." Meanwhile, Sam rigged up one of the turrets to fire randomly, but with enough precision to cause real damage. Each shot hit vital points on the flagship, weakening its defenses. "That's all we've got," she yelled over the comms. "If we get any closer, we're done for." Laura chimed in, her voice filled with urgency. "Their shields are down in 2 sections. If the main fleet hits now, they can break through." Ryan nodded. "Lisa, signal the fleet. It's time." With the Krylos distracted by the Vanguard, the larger ships launched their attack. Explosions lit up the void as torpedoes and energy beams struck the flagship. The massive vessel shuddered under the assault, its once imposing form crumbling under the combined firepower. But the battle wasn't over yet. The Krylos retaliated fiercely, focusing their remaining weapons on the vanguard. Alarms blared across the bridge as the ship sustained heavy damage. One of the engines failed, leaving them drifting dangerously close to the flagship. "We're not gonna make it," Ethan yelled, struggling to regain control. "Yes, we are," Sam shouted back, climbing into the engine room to manually reroute power. Her hands moved quickly, sweat dripping down her face as she worked against time. With a sudden jolt, the second engine roared back to life, propelling the Vanguard away from the flagship just as another explosion rocked the alien vessel. The flagship began to collapse in on itself, its core destabilizing. A massive shockwave rippled through space, sending debris flying in all directions. Ethan expertly navigated the chaos, guiding the battered Vanguard to safety. When the dust settled, the crew gathered on the bridge, staring out at the wreckage of the Krylos flagship. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the hum of the ship's damaged systems. "We did it," Lisa said finally, her voice soft with disbelief. Ryan nodded, a rare smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, we did." Later, as the Vanguard limped back to Earth, the crew reflected on everything they had been through. They were battered and bruised, but alive and victorious. The war wasn't completely over, but the tide had turned. Humanity had a fighting chance, thanks in no small part to the Vanguard. As Ryan gazed at the stars through the viewport, he felt a quiet sense of pride. The Vanguard might have been the unlikeliest hero, but it had proven that even the smallest, most flawed among them could change the course of history. And as long as there were people willing to fight for each other, humanity would always find a way to survive. For the first time in a long while, Ryan allowed himself to hope, not just for victory, but for peace.